Hi, I'm James, and for years I thought I had a marriage. Turns out I was just a tenant in my own home. I wasn't expecting to overhear my wife laughing with her friends, calling me just a roommate. I wasn't expecting that hollow, dismissive tone, like I was nothing more than an afterthought in her life. But maybe I should have. Maybe I should have seen it in the way she barely spoke to me anymore. The way she rolled her eyes when I tried. The way she forgot our anniversary like it was just another day. And when she made it clear that I was just a financial safety net, not a husband, I finally woke up. So I did the one thing she never expected. I walked away. Now, she's the one left figuring out the rent, the bills, and the life she once took for granted. But the real question is, did she ever really care? Or was I just convenient? And when she realized I was truly gone, did she regret it? Or was it already too late? Let's find out. The restaurant buzzed with conversation and the occasional clinking of silverware against ceramic plates. The dim lighting cast a warm glow, highlighting the smiles and animated gestures of the people around me. It should have been an ordinary evening, one of those routine dinners Rachel arranged with her friends, the kind where I played the role of the silent husband in the background. I hadn't wanted to come. I rarely did. These nights always played out the same way. Rachel would dive into endless gossip with her friends while I sat there, half listening, nodding when appropriate, taking slow sips of my drink, waiting for the night to be over. But tonight was different. I had ended up sitting a few seats down from Rachel instead of right beside her. The restaurant was crowded, and the long communal table meant I was just far enough that she probably assumed I couldn't hear her. I hadn't been paying attention at first, my mind preoccupied with thoughts of work, weekend plans, anything but the conversation happening between Rachel and her friends. Then I heard Samantha ask the question, "So, how's married life treating you?" Rachel laughed, a loud, dismissive laugh. "Oh, please, he's just my roommate at this point." The words sliced through me like a cold blade. A chill crawled down my spine as the others chuckled along with her, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. This wasn't the first time she had said it. I could tell by their reactions. The casual nods, the knowing glances. She meant it. I stared at her from across the table, my stomach twisting into knots. Had she always felt this way? Had I just been too blind to notice? Rachel carried on, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just detonated something inside me. I gripped the edge of the table, willing myself to stay composed. This wasn't the place to react, not in front of her friends. Not in a crowded restaurant where everyone could witness whatever storm was brewing inside me. I lowered my gaze to my plate, my appetite gone. Rachel had checked out of our marriage, and maybe, just maybe, she had done it a long time ago. The drive home was suffocating in its silence. Rachel sat beside me in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. Her fingers tapped against the screen, her face illuminated by the dull blue light. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my mind replaying her words over and over again. Just my roommate. How long had she thought this? Months? Years? I wanted to say something. I wanted to confront her right there in the car, demand an explanation, make her see the weight of what she had just done. But the words caught in my throat. Rachel sighed, stretching her legs slightly. "You were awfully quiet tonight." I clenched my jaw. She didn't know. She had no idea what she had just done. I took a slow, steady breath. "Yeah, guess I didn't have much to say." She shrugged and went back to her phone, like that was the end of it. I turned my focus back to the road, my grip on the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I couldn't stay silent forever. The moment we stepped inside, I spoke. "Why did you say that?" Rachel barely looked up from her phone. "Say what?" "You called me your roommate," I said, my voice steady but sharp. Rachel frowned, finally setting her phone down. "Oh, that? Come on, James. It was just a joke." "A joke?" My voice came out colder than I intended. She rolled her eyes. "You're taking it too seriously. It wasn't a big deal." I let out a breath, shaking my head. "You didn't sound like you were joking?" Rachel sighed, rubbing her temples like I was exhausting her. "I mean, what do you want me to say? It was just something to say in the moment. If I said the same about you in front of my friends, would you laugh it off?" She shrugged. "I wouldn't care." I studied her face, looking for something, anything, that would tell me she regretted it, that she saw what she had done. but there was nothing. Just irritation. I exhaled, the weight in my chest pressing harder. I wasn't just hurt. I wasn't just angry. I was realizing something. Something undeniable. She didn't care. She hadn't cared in a long time. Later that night, I sat alone in my office, the glow of my desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. A folder lay open in front of me, its contents spread across the polished wood surface. A house deed, mortgage agreements, financial documents, all tied to a home I had been planning to buy. For Rachel, I had spent months looking for the perfect place. I had imagined it as a new beginning, a way to breathe life back into our marriage. I thought a fresh start, a space that was ours, might remind us of what we had built together. But tonight had changed everything. I stared at the papers, my mind made up. Reaching for my phone, I dialed my realtor. When he picked up, I spoke before I could second-guess myself. I need to change the paperwork. The house will be in my name only. For the first time in months, I felt like I had control over something. Rachel had already decided I was just a roommate. Fine, she could figure out how to live without me. The next morning felt different. The air in the bedroom was thick, suffocating in a way I hadn't noticed before. The dim light filtering through the blinds did little to warm the cold space between us. Rachel was still asleep, her back turned to me. As always. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, running last night's conversation through my mind, over and over again. Her voice, her laugh, the casual way she dismissed me in front of her friends. It wasn't just what she had said, it was the way she had said it. Like it was obvious, like it was a truth she had long since accepted. I turned my head slightly, looking at her still form beside me. She looked peaceful, unaware, completely unaffected by the shift that had taken place inside me. That was what stung the most. I quietly slid out of bed, careful not to wake her. I wasn't ready to talk, not yet. I made my way to the kitchen, moving through the house on autopilot. The place that once felt like home now felt foreign, almost unfamiliar. I grabbed a mug from the cabinet, pouring myself a cup of coffee, but the usual morning routine felt hollow. For years I had convinced myself that the distance between us was temporary, that things would go back to how they used to be, that maybe, if I tried harder, loved more, gave more, she would see me again. But last night, I finally understood. She saw me. She just didn't care. A soft rustling sound pulled me from my thoughts. Rachel walked into the kitchen, her hair a mess, her eyes barely open as she reached for her own coffee. She didn't even look at me. No hesitation, no pause, not even a sleepy, good morning. She poured her coffee, grabbed her phone, and started scrolling through whatever was more important than acknowledging my presence. I waited. Maybe she would say something. Maybe she would bring up last night, laugh it off, try to explain herself. She didn't. I exhaled slowly, setting my mug down on the counter. If she wasn't going to bring it up, then I would. Do you even realize how much what you said hurt me? Rachel barely glanced up from her phone. She let out a tired sigh, like I had just reminded her to take out the trash. James, seriously? You're still on about that? I clenched my jaw. Yeah, I am. She shook her head, tapping at her screen. It was just a joke. I felt something snap inside me. A joke? My voice was sharper now. That wasn't a joke, Rachel. That was how you really see me, wasn't it? She finally set her phone down and crossed her arms. God, you are so sensitive. It was just something to say in the moment. You're making this a bigger deal than it is. I swallowed, trying to push down the bitterness rising in my chest. Would you think it was funny if I said the same thing about you? Rachel shrugged. I wouldn't care because I wouldn't take it so seriously. Her words hit me like a slap. She wasn't just deflecting. She genuinely didn't think this was a problem. I exhaled, stepping back. You really don't see it, do you? Rachel rolled her eyes and grabbed her coffee. See what? I stared at her, searching for something. Remorse, guilt, a flicker of realization. But there was nothing, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. She never would. Rachel sighed dramatically, setting her mug down on the counter with a little too much force. Honestly, James, if this bothers you so much, maybe we should just get divorced and move on. The casual way she said it made my blood turn cold. Divorce, just like that. She might as well have been suggesting we order takeout for dinner. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Divorce? Just like that? Rachel lifted a shoulder in a careless shrug. What's the big deal? Maybe we're both over this. I stared at her, waiting for her to take it back, to say something, anything that would make me believe she didn't mean it. But she didn't. She picked up her phone again, scrolling through her notifications as if we weren't discussing the end of our marriage. I felt my hands curl into fists at my sides, not in anger, but in something far worse: finality. This wasn't just about a careless joke. Rachel had already checked out of this marriage, and now, I realized, so had I. I shut the office door behind me, leaning against it for a moment. My heartbeat was steady, my hands no longer shaking. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't falling apart. I was planning. I crossed the room and sat at my desk, my eyes drifting to the papers still lying there from the night before. The house. A week ago, I had been finalizing everything, picking out furniture, imagining us building a life together in that space. I had spent so much time trying to fix things, trying to hold on to something that wasn't real anymore. I opened my laptop, my fingers moving over the keyboard with purpose. I logged into my bank account, checking my savings. It was enough. Next, I pulled up rental listings. If I left, where would I go? I wasn't reckless. I wouldn't just walk out the door with no plan. But for the first time, I understood. I had been waiting for permission to leave. Rachel had just given it to me. She didn't care if I stayed or went. But this time, I was choosing to go. The only question left was, when? The decision had been made. It was no longer a question of if I would leave, only when. I carried that thought with me as I moved through the next few days, pretending everything was normal while silently preparing for the moment I would walk out of Rachel's life for good. And then the phone call came. I was at work when my cell buzzed on my desk. My mother's name flashed on the screen, and before I even answered, I knew. Her voice was thick with grief. James, he's gone. A sharp pain stabbed through my chest. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, barely hearing her words as she explained what had happened, how my father had passed away in his sleep. Peacefully, they said, as if that made any of it easier to accept. I don't remember what I said in response, just that my body went cold, my breath uneven, and the weight of something I wasn't ready to face settled deep into my bones. That evening, I sat Rachel down and told her. She was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her legs tucked under her, as if this were any other night. I took a deep breath, forcing the words out. My dad passed away today. Rachel didn't even look up right away. That's sad. When's the funeral? She said it like she was asking about a dinner reservation. I stared at her, waiting for more, something. She finally glanced at me, arching an eyebrow when I didn't answer right away. I don't know yet, I said, my voice tight. Mom's still figuring out the details. Rachel nodded, going back to her phone. Okay. Just let me know when. The casualness of it made my skin crawl. Later that night, after my mother had finalized the arrangements, I told Rachel the date. She sighed, rubbing her forehead like I had just handed her a scheduling conflict. I don't think I can make it. I have a lot going on at work that week. I felt the air shift between us. My father had just died, and her biggest concern was her schedule. I stared at her, my heart beat loud in my ears. Rachel? He was my father. She shrugged, taking a sip of her wine. James, I didn't really know him. It's not like me being there will change anything. My chest tightened, heat rising up my neck. This isn't about you, it's about supporting me. Rachel groaned, setting her glass down with a little too much force. God, you're always making things so dramatic. I couldn't breathe. I had spent years excusing her distance, convincing myself that the coldness between us was temporary. But this was something else entirely. The last thread holding me to this marriage snapped. I exhaled sharply and stood. Forget it. I don't need you there. Rachel smirked, leaning back against the couch. Good. Because I wasn't planning to go. I walked away before I said something I'd regret. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of Rachel's breathing beside me. My body felt heavy, like it was sinking into the mattress. But my mind was already somewhere else. I was done. The next morning, I started packing. Not everything, just what mattered. The essentials, my clothes, my laptop, my important documents, the rest. She could have it. I moved quietly, carefully. making sure Rachel didn't notice. Not that she would. She was too absorbed in her own world to see what was happening right in front of her. I wondered how long it would take before she even realized I was leaving. That evening, Rachel came home from work, dropping her bag onto the kitchen counter like she always did. I was sitting in the living room, my bags packed beside me. She frowned, her gaze flicking between me and the suitcase. "Are you going somewhere?" I stood, meeting her eyes for the last time. "Yeah, I am." Rachel scoffed, crossing her arms. "Oh, please, where are you even going?" I didn't answer. I just picked up my bags and walked past her. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't ask me to stay. She just watched as I opened the door, stepped outside, and closed it behind me. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. The silence behind me was deafening, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't hurt. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing the past in its place. I didn't look back. The air outside felt crisp against my skin as I stepped onto the sidewalk. The weight I'd carried for years suddenly feeling lighter. The street stretched ahead, filled with possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to consider until now. I drove across the city in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound in the empty space where my thoughts used to be consumed by Rachel. I had booked a short-term rental, nothing fancy, just enough to give me time to figure out what came next. When I walked inside, I took it all in. The bare walls, the unfamiliar scent of the place, the way the floor creaked under my weight. It wasn't home, not yet, but it was mine. I tossed my bag onto the couch, exhaling slowly as I poured myself a drink. The quiet was different here. It wasn't the suffocating, heavy silence of my marriage. It was peaceful. I didn't feel resentful. I didn't feel ignored. I didn't feel trapped. For the first time in years, I simply existed. Then my phone buzzed on the table. Rachel. I stared at the screen, waiting for some part of me to feel something. Maybe regret, maybe curiosity. Instead, all I felt was mild irritation. I took a sip of my drink, let it settle, and finally picked up my phone. Her message wasn't long. "Did you cancel the autopay for the bills?" "No." "Where are you?" "No." "Are you okay?" Just a financial question. I let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking my head. Even now, after everything, that was what she cared about. I typed a simple response. "Yes. You'll have to handle them now." I didn't wait for a reply. I already knew what she was thinking. She had never believed I would actually leave. Rachel sat on the couch, her fingers gripping her phone as she read the message again. She had barely processed my absence before reality came crashing down in the form of unpaid bills and overdue expenses. She opened her banking app, scrolling through the transactions. My name was gone. She checked the rent payment, due in just a few days. Her chest tightened as she calculated everything: the rent, the utilities, the credit card bills she had never worried about before because I had always been there to split them. And now, she was alone. She bit her lip, debating whether to call me. She wanted to believe she had everything under control, but the sinking feeling in her stomach told her otherwise. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. For the first time in years, I hadn't spent the night staring at the ceiling, replaying arguments or questioning where I stood in my own home. I felt good. I pulled on my running shoes, stepping out into the cool morning air. It had been years since I had done this, gone for a run without worrying about time, without feeling the need to rush home. As my feet pounded against the pavement, I realized something. Being alone didn't scare me anymore. By the time I returned to my apartment, sweaty and breathless, I felt lighter than I had in years. Then I saw it, another message from Rachel. "We need to talk. Call me." I sighed, wiping the sweat from my forehead. I didn't need to read between the lines. She didn't want to talk because she missed me. She didn't suddenly realize she had made a mistake. She needed something. Help, not love. I locked my phone, tossing it onto the counter. She wanted to talk now? Too bad. She should have cared when I was still there. The days passed quietly. For the first time in years, my life belonged to me. No more forced conversations, no more waiting for Rachel's attention, no more feeling like a shadow in my own home. The apartment wasn't much, but it was mine. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse, but the space felt open in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. I woke up when I wanted, ate when I felt like it, sat on the couch without waiting for someone to acknowledge my presence. It was peaceful. But peace came with a price. At night, when the world outside settled into quiet stillness, my mind had nowhere to go except backward. I would close my eyes, trying to embrace the silence, only for memories to slip through the cracks. How did I let things get so bad? I had spent years convincing myself that Rachel's distance was temporary, that she was just going through a phase, that if I just held on a little longer, things would go back to the way they used to be. But now, with nothing left to distract me, I saw the truth. It had been over for a long time. I remembered the first time I should have known something was wrong. Our anniversary. It had been a few years ago, back when I still believed in grand gestures and second chances. I had planned everything. A nice dinner at the restaurant where we had our first date, a handwritten letter, a gift I knew she would love. Rachel didn't plan anything. She didn't even remember. When I reminded her that morning, she blinked at me like I had just told her the weather forecast. "Oh, right. Well, it's just another day, James. Just another day." I had laughed it off back then, told myself it wasn't a big deal. But that night, when we sat across from each other at dinner, her attention more focused on her phone than on me, I felt it for the first time, that quiet, aching sense of invisibility. And instead of listening to that feeling, I buried it. Then there was the night I truly understood who she had become, the night my mother was hospitalized. It was late, past midnight, when my phone rang. I barely registered the sound until I saw my sister's name flashing on the screen. "James, it's Mom. We're at the ER." My body went cold. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, trying to process her words. I turned to Rachel, my voice shaking. "My mom's in the hospital. I have to go." Rachel groaned, shifting under the covers. "Do you really have to? It's probably nothing serious." I stared at her, waiting for her to realize what she had just said. She didn't. She just rolled over, pulling the blanket tighter around her. I went alone that night, sitting beside my mother's hospital bed, listening to the beeping machines and the distant chatter of nurses. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I had been too afraid to consider. Why am I still with her? I shook my head, forcing the memory away. I had spent so much time making excuses for Rachel, but the truth was simple. She didn't care. She never had. I grabbed my phone, unlocking it to see another unread message from her. "Are you really going to ignore me forever?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I could reply. I could tell her exactly what I thought. I could let her know how deeply she had hurt me. Instead, I deleted the message, set my phone down, and walked away. Rachel was no longer my problem, and for the first time, I felt free. I spent the next few days settling into my new life, adjusting to the quiet, to the newfound freedom that came with knowing I owed Rachel nothing. There were no forced conversations, no tense silences filled with unspoken resentment. The weight that had sat on my chest for years was finally gone, but some ghosts refused to stay buried. As I unpacked a box in my living room, my hand brushed against something familiar, an old family photo. I picked it up, staring at the image of my parents and me, taken during one of their visits. My father had his arm around my mother, his smile as bright as I remembered. He had always been a man of quiet strength, someone who believed in hard work, but also in the importance of family. A lump formed in my throat as another memory surfaced, one I had pushed aside for too long. The night Rachel humiliated him. It had been a simple family dinner. My parents had come over, my mother helping in the kitchen, while my father sat at the table, sharing stories about his retirement. He had worked for decades, provided for his family, and now he was finally getting to enjoy the life he had built. Rachel barely engaged. She scrolled through her phone, sipping her wine, only looking up when my father mentioned taking up woodworking as a hobby. "Must be nice to quit working and do nothing all day," she said, smirking. The room went silent. My father chuckled awkwardly, but I saw it, the flicker of hurt in his eyes. I clenched my jaw, forcing a smile, trying to move the conversation forward. But later that night, I pulled Rachel aside. "That was unnecessary," I told her. She rolled her eyes. "What?" "I was just saying the truth." No apology, no acknowledgement of how dismissive she had been. And yet, I had stayed. I had let moments like that slide, convinced myself they didn't matter. But they did. They all did. And now, standing in my apartment, staring at that photo, I wondered, Why had I ever believed she respected me when she had never even respected my family? My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me back to the present. Rachel. I almost ignored it, but something made me glance at the screen. I think we should talk. I miss you. I let out a sharp breath, shaking my head. She didn't miss me. She missed the life I had given her. She missed the security, the convenience. She missed the version of me who would have answered immediately, desperate to fix what was broken. But that man was gone. I put my phone down, leaving her message unread. Rachel could miss me all she wanted. It wouldn't change a damn thing. That night, my phone rang. I stared at the screen, watching her name flash. For a moment, I hesitated. Then, against my better judgment, I picked up. But I didn't speak. A few seconds of silence passed before I heard her voice, softer than I remembered. James, can we just talk? I exhaled slowly. Talk about what, Rachel? Silence. Then she said it. I made a mistake. My grip on the phone tightened. Was she finally realizing what she had lost? Or was this just another way to manipulate the situation, to pull me back into something I had already left behind? I knew the answer before she even spoke again. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. You're not sorry for what you did, I said. You're sorry because you're alone. That's not true, she snapped, but there was no conviction in her voice. Then why didn't you care when I was still there? I asked, my tone calm, firm. More silence. Finally a whisper. So, that's it? I let the words hang between us, giving them the weight they deserved. Yeah, Rachel, I said quietly. That's it. I ended the call and set my phone down. No anger, no regret, just clarity. Rachel was my past. My future? That was mine to build. The sun poured through my apartment window, casting long shadows across the floor as I took a slow sip of coffee. The morning felt lighter somehow, as if a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had finally lifted. I had spent years waiting for Rachel to change, for things to get better, for her to see me the way she used to. But last night's call had sealed it. There was no going back. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting anymore. I grabbed my keys and headed out, deciding to treat myself to something simple. A coffee at the small shop a few blocks away. I was still adjusting to this new life, figuring out who I was without Rachel in the background. I was just about to take my first sip when a familiar voice sent a chill down my spine. James. I looked up, my jaw tightening as Rachel stood in front of me. I hadn't told her where I moved. She must have asked around, maybe tracked me through social media. However she found me, I didn't like it. She hesitated for a moment before sliding into the chair across from me. Her hands fidgeted around her coffee cup, a nervous energy I wasn't used to seeing from her. I just want to talk. I set my cup down slowly, exhaling through my nose. We already did. She sighed, shaking her head. I mean, in person. You owe me that much. I clenched my jaw. I don't owe you anything. But she wasn't leaving without a fight. Rachel leaned forward, her eyes searching mine. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. I let out a short, bitter laugh, leaning back in my chair. Fix what, Rachel? You never respected me. You didn't even care when I left. That's not true, she snapped, her voice too loud for the quiet cafe. A few people glanced in our direction, but I didn't care. I raised an eyebrow, tilting my head slightly. Then, why was the first thing you asked me about the bills? Rachel froze. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She didn't have an answer, because I was right. That night, Rachel sat at a bar with her usual group of friends, the ones who used to laugh along with her at dinner parties, the ones who used to agree with every sarcastic remark she made about me. But tonight, something was different. She could feel it. Samantha was unusually quiet, sipping her drink while texting someone on her phone. Jessica, never one to hold back, smirked and leaned toward Rachel. So, she said, swirling the ice in her glass, what's it like paying all your bills alone now? Rachel's stomach dropped. She forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow, even to her own ears. I'm managing, Jessica snorted. Right. Rachel's hands tightened around her glass. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go. She had come here expecting support, sympathy. But instead, she was being treated like a joke, like an outsider. She thought her friends would be on her side. She was wrong. They never cared about her. They cared about the lifestyle she had with me. Back at the coffee shop, Rachel's voice was quieter now. "So that's it?" she whispered. "You're really done?" I exhaled, watching the way her shoulders had slumped, the way her confidence had cracked just slightly at the edges. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady. "I am." She stared down at the table, her fingers tapping against the ceramic mug. I stood up, pulling a few bills from my pocket and setting them next to my cup. "Take care of yourself, Rachel." I turned and walked out the door, stepping onto the sunlit sidewalk. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt free. Meanwhile, back at the table, Rachel sat alone, and for the first time in her life, she realized she had never felt this alone before. Rachel sat frozen at the coffee shop table long after I had left, staring blankly at the untouched drink in front of her. Conversations buzzed around her, the clinking of glasses, the soft hum of music in the background. But none of it registered. She was alone. Not just physically, but in a way she had never felt before. For years she had convinced herself she was untouchable, that she could say and do whatever she wanted without consequence, that no matter what, life would always bend in her favor. But now she wasn't so sure. The sinking feeling in her stomach deepened as she picked up her purse, exiting the cafe with slow, deliberate steps. She needed to clear her mind. She needed to figure out how to fix this. But as she stepped back into the life she had built for herself, one without me in it, she was about to realize just how much damage had already been done. When Rachel arrived home, the first thing she noticed was the envelope taped to the door, her brows furrowed. She tugged it free, flipping it over, her heart picking up speed as she read the bolded letters at the top. Eviction notice. A cold sweat broke out on the back of her neck. She fumbled with her keys, shoving the door open and tossing her purse aside as she grabbed her phone. Her fingers moved quickly, opening her banking app. The numbers on the screen made her stomach drop. She was behind. Far behind. The rent was due. The utilities were past due. Credit card balances loomed over her like a ticking time bomb. She had thought she could handle everything on her own. She had been wrong. Her breathing became uneven, her chest tightening as she sank onto the couch. I wasn't paying for anything anymore. I wasn't there to split the bills, to cover the unexpected expenses, to make sure everything was taken care of. And now, without me, she was drowning. Her hands shook as she dialed Samantha's number. It rang 3 times before she picked up. "Hey, Rach," Samantha said, her voice hesitant. Rachel didn't have time for small talk. "Can I crash at your place for a bit? Just until I figure some things out." A pause, a long one. Rachel's throat went dry. "Sam?" Samantha sighed. "I don't think that's a good idea." Rachel's grip tightened on the phone. "What? Why?" Another pause. "It's just, I have a lot going on right now." Rachel felt her stomach twist. "So do I." Samantha didn't respond. Rachel inhaled sharply, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Right. Okay. Forget I asked." She ended the call before Samantha could respond, staring at the screen for a moment before dialing another number, then another. Each time, it was the same. Excuses, hesitation, no one willing to help. She had surrounded herself with people who laughed with her, partied with her, shared gossip over overpriced cocktails. But now, when she needed them, they were gone. She had never been their friend. She had just been entertainment. The apartment was eerily quiet as Rachel sat alone, staring at the designer furniture she once bragged about. It didn't matter now. The clothes, the decorations, the luxury she had filled her life with. It was all meaningless. She had everything, and she threw it away. Her eyes flickered to the empty space where my things used to be. For the first time, she wondered, had she ever really loved me? Or had she just loved the idea of me? She closed her eyes, leaning back against the couch, but the silence pressed down on her. She had never felt this alone before. A week later, the knock on the door was sharp and final. Rachel opened it to see her landlord standing there, a clipboard in hand. "Ms. Foster, the movers will be here in an hour." She nodded stiffly, forcing herself to keep her head high as she stepped back inside. She moved mechanically, stuffing clothes into bags, shoving shoes into suitcases. The furniture wasn't hers anymore. She had already sold most of it, trying to scrape together enough money to buy herself more time. But time had run out. The movers came and went, carrying away the last remnants of the life she had built. She avoided eye contact with the landlord as she stepped outside, gripping the handle of her suitcase so tightly her knuckles turned white. She turned back one last time, staring at the empty apartment behind her, the place she had once shared with me, the place she thought she would never lose. But it wasn't hers anymore, and as she stood there, reality finally settled in. She had lost everything, and for the first time, she understood exactly what she had done to me. I sat at my desk, flipping through old files, organizing papers that had been collecting dust for years. It was a mindless task, something to keep my hands busy while my thoughts drifted elsewhere. It had been weeks since I left Rachel, weeks of peace, clarity, and the slow realization that I had spent years in a marriage that had ended long before I ever walked out the door. I exhaled, stretching my arms before reaching for my laptop. As I sorted through folders on my hard drive, I came across an old email account I hadn't used in ages. I clicked on it out of habit, expecting nothing but junk mail and forgotten subscriptions. But then I saw it. A message from months ago. Rachel's name sat in the sender's line. My pulse slowed as I clicked on it. It wasn't addressed to me. It was a forwarded message to Samantha. I just need a little more time. Once I have enough saved, I'm out of here. The words blurred in front of me. I read it again. And again. Rachel had been planning to leave me long before I had left her. Rachel sat in a cramped motel room, staring at the peeling wallpaper as the weight of her new reality pressed down on her. The bed was stiff, the room smelled faintly of bleach, and the cheap overhead light flickered every few seconds. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She had always imagined herself as the one in control, the one who would decide how and when things ended. But now, she was here, alone. Her phone buzzed. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. Yeah, maybe it was someone reaching out, an old friend, someone offering a couch to crash on. She grabbed it quickly, only for her stomach to drop. It was her boss. Her hands were clammy as she answered. "Rachel," came the clipped voice on the other end. "We need to talk." Minutes later, she was rushing into the office, forcing a smile as she stepped inside. But it was already over. Her boss barely looked at her as he slid a termination letter across the desk. "You've been distracted, missing deadlines, and honestly, your attitude isn't what we need anymore." Rachel opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. She had been fired. As she walked out of the building, a strange sense of emptiness filled her. She had no home, no friends, no James. She had nothing. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the email. I should have been furious. I should have felt betrayed. But I didn't. I felt nothing. Rachel had spent so much time convincing herself that she was the one in control, that she could leave me on her own terms. But in the end, she had played herself. She thought she could do better. And now, she had no one. I grabbed a glass from the counter, pouring myself a drink as a slow smirk tugged at my lips. I was finally free. Rachel sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the last few bills in her hand. Her bank account was nearly empty. She had burned every bridge. And for the first time in her life, she had no backup plan. The walls of the room felt like they were closing in on her. A lump formed in her throat as her vision blurred. The tears came slowly at first, then all at once. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as sobs racked through her body. She had thought she would always have the upper hand, that she would always be the one who had control. But in the end, she was the one left with nothing. And for the first time, she wished she had done thin. Rachel wiped at her face, but the tears kept coming. Her breath hitched as she stared at the cracked ceiling of her motel room, the dim light flickering above. She had been so sure that she was in control, that she had the upper hand in everything. But now, she was broke, alone. And for the first time, she truly understood what it felt like to be left behind. Meanwhile, across town, I was experiencing something completely different. I wasn't planning on stopping by the bookstore. It had been an impulse decision, a small distraction from my usual routine. The past few weeks had been filled with change, and for the first time in a long time, I had the freedom to do things for myself. As I ran my fingers along the spines of the books on the shelf, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "James?" I turned, my brows lifting in surprise. There, standing a few feet away, was Elena. It had been years since I'd last seen her. College friends, back when life had felt simpler, when the future had been a blank page waiting to be filled. She smiled, her eyes lighting up in recognition. "Wow," she laughed. "It's been forever." Something inside me eased for the first time in weeks. Maybe this wasn't just a coincidence. Elena and I ended up at a cafe a few blocks from the bookstore, the kind of place where soft jazz played in the background, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. We slipped into conversation like no time had passed at all. "So," she said, stirring her drink, "what have you been up to all these years?" I hesitated. The easy answer would have been to gloss over everything, to say I had been working, keeping busy, moving through life like everyone else. But something about Elena's presence made me want to be honest. "So," I told her, about Rachel, about the marriage, about how I had held on for far too long, only to realize I was never really holding on to anything at all. She listened, not interrupting, not offering empty words of sympathy. Then, when I finished, she leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing on her lips. "You know," she said, "you seem lighter now, like a weight's been lifted." I exhaled, nodding. Because it has. And for the first time, I wasn't defined by my past. Rachel sat on the lumpy motel bed, scrolling through her phone, looking for something, anything, to take her mind off the mess her life had become. And then she saw it, a photo. James, sitting at a cafe, laughing, with another woman. Rachel's stomach twisted. She had never expected him to move on. Not this soon, not like this. And yet, there he was, happy. Happier than he ever was with her. She swallowed hard, locking her phone. She had been so sure he would come back. But now, for the first time, she wasn't sure at all. The sun was starting to set as Elena and I walked through the park, the crisp evening air filling the spaces between our conversation. It was easy with her. There was no tension, no resentment, no pretending to be something I wasn't. For once, I was just present. Elena nudged me playfully. "So," she teased, "you're officially single now, huh?" I chuckled, shaking my head. "Yeah, and I think I'm finally okay with that." She smiled. "Good, you deserve to be." I glanced up at the sky, watching as the last rays of sunlight faded into the horizon. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking back. And, maybe, I was ready for whatever came next. The city lights flickered outside my window as I sat in my apartment, letting the quiet settle around me. It had been a long time since I felt this at peace. No lingering resentment, no weight of an unfulfilled marriage pressing down on me. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, my stomach tightening slightly at the name that appeared. Rachel. For a split second, I considered ignoring it, but something made me open the message. "James, can we just talk? No accusations, no demands, no mentions of money or logistics. Just a plea." I stared at the words, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. But instead of replying, I locked my phone and set it aside. There was nothing left to say. Rachel sat on the edge of the motel bed, gripping her phone like it was a lifeline. She had typed the message with shaky hands, hoping, praying, that maybe, just maybe, I would answer. But the minutes ticked by. Nothing. She swallowed hard, scrolling through her contacts until she landed on another name. Samantha. Her last hope. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. "Hey, it's me," Rachel said quickly. "Look, I know things have been weird, but Samantha sighed, cutting her off. "Rachel, you're exhausting." Rachel blinked. "What?" "You did this to yourself," Samantha said flatly. "You pushed everyone away, and now you're acting surprised that no one wants to deal with you?" Rachel felt her throat tighten. "Sam, please." Click. The line went dead. Rachel sat frozen, the dial tone ringing in her ears. She was completely alone. I poured myself a glass of water, walking over to the small balcony attached to my apartment. The night air was cool against my skin, the hum of the city below, a strange but welcome contrast to the suffocating silence I had grown used to in my marriage. I hadn't thought about Rachel all day, and when her message had come through, I hadn't felt anger or sadness, just nothing. The past was finally behind me, and for the first time, I realized I never wanted to go back. Rachel curled up on the motel bed, the flickering light above her making her headache worse. Her phone was silent, her bank account was empty, her life was in shambles. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, trying to stop the flood of regret that threatened to consume her. How had she let it get this bad? She had always been so sure she had control, that no matter what, she would come out on top. But now she was at rock bottom, with no one left to turn to. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "What have I done?" For the first time, she wished she could undo it all. Rachel sat on the floor of her motel room, her back pressed against the cold wall. The room smelled of stale air and cheap cleaning products, the dim yellow light casting long shadows across the faded carpet. She had whispered the words before, but now they echoed louder in her mind. What have I done? She reached for her laptop, her fingers trembling as she pulled up her banking app. The numbers glared at her. Overdue rent. Utilities past due. Credit card balances climbing higher than she could handle. Her hands clenched into fists. She had always told herself she would figure it out, that she'd find a way to keep everything afloat. But now she knew she couldn't. Rachel stuffed the last of her belongings into 2 worn-out suitcases, her movements slow, mechanical. She had been forced to break her lease, the landlord giving her a deadline to be out by the end of the week. Now she was moving into the only place she could afford, a 1-bedroom apartment in a rundown complex on the other side of town. The moment she stepped inside, the reality of her new life hit her. The walls were thin, yellowed from years of neglect. The carpet smelled damp. A single flickering light bulb buzzed from the ceiling. The neighbors were loud. Someone was yelling in the hallway, a dog barking from another unit. Rachel dragged her suitcases inside, kicking the door shut behind her. There was no bed, no furniture. She sank down onto the thin mattress she had managed to buy, wrapping her arms around herself as she stared at the cracked ceiling. She had once looked down on people who lived in places like this, and now she was one of them. She had once had everything. Now she had nothing. Across town, I woke up to the soft light of morning streaming through my window. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air as I stretched, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. This house, my house, finally felt like home. No tension, no resentment, just quiet, steady contentment. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stepped onto the back porch, watching as the sun rose over the horizon. My phone buzzed beside me, a text from Elena. "Breakfast tomorrow?" A smile tugged at the corner of my lips as I typed out a response. "Sounds good." For the first time in years, I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward. Rachel sat alone in her empty apartment, hugging her knees to her chest. The silence pressed down on her. For the first time, she let herself see the truth. She had done this. Not James, not bad luck, not anyone else, her. She had pushed him away. She had ignored the warning signs. She had treated him like an afterthought. And now she was the one who had been forgotten. Rachel squeezed her eyes shut, but the memories played anyway. Every moment she had dismissed him. Every time she had made him feel like he wasn't enough. If she had chosen differently, would she still have everything? But there was no going back. And for the first time, she stopped blaming James. She only blamed herself. Rachel sat in the darkness of her apartment. The hum of a distant car engine, the only sound breaking the silence. The small room around her felt colder than it should have, empty in a way that had nothing to do with the lack of furniture. She pulled her knees to her chest, staring at the dim glow of the streetlights outside the window. The fridge was empty. Her bank account was nearly drained. Her phone hadn't buzzed in days. She had always been surrounded by people, always had someone to call, somewhere to go. But tonight, she had no one. And for the first time, she understood what true loneliness felt like. She picked up her phone, her fingers scrolling through old photos without thinking. One after another, images of her past life flickered across the screen. Dinners with friends, expensive vacations, the designer bags she used to show off. Then, she landed on a picture of James. It was an old one, years before things had crumbled, back when he still looked at her like she was his entire world. Rachel stared at his face, her chest tightening. She had spent so much time pushing him away, convincing herself that she didn't need him, that he would always be there, no matter what. But he had left, and he wasn't coming back. She set the phone down, her vision blurring. I never thought he'd actually leave, she whispered into the silence. Lying on the mattress, Rachel stared at the ceiling, her body heavy with exhaustion. But she couldn't sleep. Her thoughts twisted in endless circles, tightening around her like a noose. There was no more pretending, no more excuses. She had lost everything. And for the first time, a terrifying thought crept in. Maybe I don't deserve to be here. Her breath hitched. She clenched the blanket between her fingers, trying to shake it off. But the thought stayed. For the first time, she didn't know if she even wanted to wake up tomorrow. And that scared her. More than anything else, that terrified her. With shaking hands, she reached for her phone. There was only one person she could think of, the last person she ever expected to need. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She knew he had every right to ignore her, that he didn't owe her anything, but she didn't know who else to turn to. Her hands trembled as she typed. James, I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I don't know what to do anymore. She stared at the message, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, she hit send. The message was delivered. Rachel set the phone down, exhaling shakily. Would he even read it? And if he did, would he care? The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting streaks of golden light across the wooden floors. I stretched, inhaling deeply as I prepared to start my day, until my phone buzzed from the nightstand. I hesitated before reaching for it, already having a feeling who it was. Rachel. James, please, just talk to me. Her words sat on the screen, small and desperate. I stared at the message for a long moment, debating whether to respond. A part of me, the part that had once loved her, almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then, memories of the past hit me like a tidal wave. The dismissive remarks, the cold indifference, the way she had laughed about me behind my back. And suddenly, I felt nothing at all. She made her choice. Now, I was making mine. Later that morning, I sat at my desk, sorting through old paperwork. I had been meaning to clear out the clutter, to finally close every lingering tie to my past. That's when I found it, an old email thread buried deep in my files. I frowned, clicking it open, and there it was. Rachel's words, written months ago. I just need a little more time. Once I have enough saved, I'm out of here. My stomach twisted, not with anger, but with realization. She had planned to leave me first. All those nights I had spent questioning myself, wondering if I had failed as a husband, if I had somehow pushed her away. It had never been about me. She had been waiting for the right moment to walk away. She just never expected me to be the one to leave first. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head as a bitter chuckle escaped my lips. You wanted to be free of me? I muttered under my breath. Well, congratulations. And now, she was the one who had lost everything. The office was quiet when I walked in, the sterile scent of paper and fresh coffee lingering in the air. My lawyer greeted me with a firm handshake. James, are you sure about this? He asked, flipping through the finalized documents. I nodded without hesitation. Rachel had once been entitled to half of everything, the house, the savings, everything we built together. But not anymore. She had walked away from me emotionally long before I left physically. And now I was making sure there was nothing left to tie us together. I picked up the pen and signed the last document. The house was mine. My life was mine. Rachel got nothing. And I had never felt lighter. That evening, I sat on the porch of my house, a cold drink in hand, as I watched the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in hues of orange and deep violet, a quiet kind of peace settling into my bones. Then, my phone buzzed again. Another missed call from Rachel. I exhaled slowly, my fingers hovering over the screen. She would never stop reaching out. Not because she missed me, but because she missed what I had provided for her. And I wasn't going to be that person anymore. With a calm finality, I opened her contact information. Blocked. No second thoughts, no hesitation. Just closure. Tomorrow was a new day. And Rachel? She was no longer a part of it. The morning light streamed through my bedroom window, casting a warm glow across the room. I stretched, inhaling the crisp air of a new day. No tension, no tightness in my chest. Just an unfamiliar, but welcome, sense of peace. For the first time in years, I woke up without the weight of Rachel on my mind, No messages waiting, no lingering resentment, just me. I padded into the kitchen, the familiar hum of the coffee machine filling the silence. As I stood by the window, sipping my coffee, I let myself take it all in. I was free, no expectations, no obligations. It was a Saturday morning, and for the first time in a long time, my time was mine. Then, my phone buzzed on the counter. A familiar name lit up the screen. Elena. We met at a small cafe, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The kind of place that smelled like fresh pastries and roasted coffee beans. Elena greeted me with a smile, her eyes bright as she slid into the seat across from me. "You look good," she said, studying me for a moment. I chuckled. "What, did I look that bad before?" She grinned. "Let's just say, you seem different now." We talked for hours, the conversation flowing effortlessly. It wasn't forced, it wasn't strained, it just was. At one point, she leaned back, tilting her head slightly. "You know, I don't think I've ever seen you this relaxed." I took a sip of my coffee, nodding. Because I finally let go. And for the first time, I meant it. Meanwhile, across town, Rachel sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, just ghosts of the past, photos, messages, pieces of a life she had once taken for granted. She clicked on our last conversation, her thumb hovering over the screen. But there were no tears this time, no hope that I would respond, just an emptiness she had come to accept. With a deep breath, she pressed delete. The conversation disappeared, and for the first time, she let me go. Elena and I walked through the park as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh grass and distant laughter from a nearby playground. "So," she said, glancing at me. "What now?" I exhaled, feeling the weight of the past finally slipping away. "I guess, whatever comes next." She smiled. "I think you'll be just fine." I met her gaze, a slow smile spreading across my face. For the first time in years, I believed it too. A few days had passed since that night at the park. The crisp morning air carried the scent of fresh rain as I stepped onto my front porch, a warm cup of coffee in hand. The past didn't haunt me anymore. It was just there. A chapter of my life that had been written, finished, and closed. Then I saw it. An envelope in my mailbox. There was no return address, but I knew who it was from before I even opened it. Rachel. For a moment, I debated throwing it away, but something made me tear it open. The letter was short, just a few sentences written in careful, almost hesitant handwriting. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I hope you're happy." I read the words twice, waiting for some sort of emotion to hit me. Anger, regret, nostalgia, but none of it came. All I felt was peace. Rachel pulled her coat tighter around herself as she walked through the quiet streets of her new neighborhood. It wasn't glamorous, the sidewalks were cracked, the houses small, but it was hers. She had a job now, not a great one, not what she had once envisioned for herself, but it was enough to get by. She passed a young couple on the sidewalk, their laughter filling the chilly air. For a moment, something inside her ached. She could have had that. She did have that, and she had let it slip through her fingers. But dwelling on the past wouldn't change it. She took a deep breath and kept walking. Her story wasn't over yet. That evening, I stood on my balcony, watching the lights of the city flicker against the night sky. For years, I had looked out at this skyline with a sense of emptiness, feeling like something was missing. But now, I just saw possibilities. My phone buzzed. A message from Elena. "Dinner tomorrow?" A slow smile spread across my face as I typed my response. "Absolutely." For the first time, I wasn't looking back, only forward. I stepped inside, shutting the balcony door behind me. The weight of the past was still there, lingering like a faint echo, but it no longer controlled me. Everything that had happened, the love, the loss, the pain, had shaped me. But it did not define me. I took a deep breath, letting it all settle. I made it. And as I turned off the lights and walked toward my future, I knew some endings aren't really endings at all. They're just the start of something new. Life has a way of teaching us lessons we refuse to acknowledge. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to truly find ourselves. I have stepped away from a past that no longer served me, and in doing so, I found something greater: peace, self-worth, and a future worth embracing. We all deserve to be cherished, to live a fulfilling life. Never settle for less than your true worth. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Your journey isn't over, it's only just beginning. See you in the next story.